Hey, this is Christian with Dark Portents, and today I'm talking to all of you who enjoy epic fantasy, particularly some gritty, dark, funny epic fantasy, but specifically, I'm talking to those First Law fans out there who read all of First Law, or maybe just the trilogy, or the trilogy and the standalones, I don't know. But somebody who's read, quite a big chunk of First Law, and they're thinking to themselves, why aren't there more books to read like this? Why aren't there more authors who write in this style, this fun, terse, with the prose at least, funny, gritty, dark style with these flawed characters, great battle sequences and all the rest of it. Yeah, I want more of this. I want more characters like Logan Ninefingers, or the Dogman, or Monskero Makato, the Nikamo Casca, famed soldier of fortune. That's the fella. We're gonna get more of this, right? Well, I've got some good news for you. You can get it by reading the Crimson Empire Trilogy by Alex Marshall. First book is called A Crown for Cold Silver, and man, if you wanted the just more something like Best Served Cold, but with many a twist, so that it doesn't feel like you're just reading the same book again, but it's actually like this new cool thing that's very different and has its own sort of feel to it as well. This is it! A Crown for Cold Silver. Go pick it up, read it, you're gonna love it, and then when you're finished, I don't even need to tell you to buy book 2 and book 3, because you're gonna get them. Especially if you get them on Audible or audiobook. The narrator just nails this book. It's fantastic. It's so good. Oh, get that baby on audiobook. It's amazing. Not quite Stephen Pacey levels of amazing, but it's really, really good, okay? But let's talk about it. Let's get into it. Okay, so first of all, the characters in this book. How many of you in the audience, whether you're First Law fans or not, how many of you are sick of reading the same coming-of-age farm boy goes on a quest narrative? Isn't it obnoxious? Okay, how many farm boys pick up swords and go on quests? How many times is it a juvenile that saves the world? Okay, who needs that? Okay, so what do we have here instead? Okay, so there's not really a main character. I mean, it's big epic fantasy with an ensemble cast, right? But most people who read First Law Trilogy for the first time, they all zoom in on Logan Ninefingers, and he has big main character vibes. He's not really the main character. Arguably, you could put Glockta in that position, but he has that feel. Many people would say he's the main character of the first trilogy. Definitely in the first book, the Blade itself, it feels like he's the main character. Or Monskero Makato, definitely main character vibes, even more so than with Logan Ninefingers. Monskero Makato has those main character vibes in Best Served Cold, right? Even though it's an ensemble cast and blah, blah, blah. So here, our not main character, but yeah, it's a main character here, is Cold Zosha. Cold Zosha is a middle-aged woman who begins the book in retirement. Talk about a breath of fresh air, right? Before you even get into how fucking badass she is, we're not starting with a 16-year-old farm boy. We're not even starting with a warrior in their mid-20s. This is a retired warlord chilling in her village, smoking some weed on her porch with her husband. And she's old, okay? And she's the main heroine, right? So we start the book where Cold Zosha is believed to be dead. She used to have a mercenary company called the Cobalt Company, and at one time she ruled the Crimson Empire. But for some reason, most people believe it's because she got killed by the current Empress. She's no longer in power, and we find out very early on in the books, it's not really spoilers, like chapter 1, maybe it's in the prologue, that she's actually retired in this village with her husband, and she has her dog Chop Liquor, and we'll get back to that dog in a second. Oh boy, there's some animal companions in this book series. She used to had a group called the Five Villains that were at the top of the Cobalt Company and when they ruled the Crimson Empire. And they're all these big, scary names that are like associated with all these legends, and they all had these demons that were associated with them and had great power. You have names like the Mighty Moroto and things like that. And these are like the scariest, baddest dudes that you've ever met, or so we're told at the beginning, right? And you also in this, and so at the beginning, anyway, with Cold Zosha, you start out with her kind of giving up the life, and she's not into it anymore. And you know, somebody finds out she's alive. They come, they burn down her village, kill her husband. This is like chapter 1 stuff, not really spoilers. I think it's on the blurb on the back of the cover. Okay, so we're not spoiling things. This is like premise stuff. Okay, and she escapes, and so she swears revenge. Right, very best served cold setup. But we got an old lady who carves pipes for a living in her retirement, who's going off on her revenge quest with her dog, Chop Liquor, who's actually a devil. It's a devil. And it's like, you know, it's a sentient being that's like her magical animal companion, her familiar, if you will. And she goes with Chop Liquor on this quest for vengeance against the Crimson Empire because of what they do to her village at the beginning of the book, right? But she's not the only great character. There's so many great characters. One of our other viewpoint characters is the Mighty Moroto, one of my favorite characters in all of fantasy. This guy is just like the best example I've come across of somebody who just like constantly, absurdly fails upward or fails forward, just like seems so competent to everybody else, but as the reader and as the character knows, he's just this giant fuck up. He starts the book as like a drug addict. He's retired from the life, and he's just like escorting these nobles that he doesn't really care about through these like, you know, pseudo dangerous areas, and he's just kind of like a tour guide and doesn't even really go by. I think he tries to hide that he's the Mighty Moroto at first from these nobles, and he's just like trying to like, and he's just addicted to drugs, right? And the drugs, we'll get to that later. This is some of the best depiction of drug use I have ever seen in fantasy, and it ties in with the world building and the magic system and everything. Oh, so good. But the Mighty Moroto, man, this guy screws up constantly. He's by the seat of his pants all the time. Major like Locke Lamora vibes, except he's this old grizzled veteran. He's an old man. He's barely keeping up with anything, and he's constantly trying to get a fix. But he's one of the greatest friends, like to his friends and to his comrades and to people that he decides are on his side. He's just a solid dude, man, and he like really tries to do right by everybody, despite the fact that he's like high all the time and blundering his way through battles and doesn't know anything but a life of killing and people backstabbing each other, and he has this lifetime of mistakes in his past. He really tries to do right by everybody. Moroto is the shit. Love Moroto. But you also have, in addition to all these old heads from the Five Villains and the head of the Cobalt Company, you have these young, up-and-coming characters that are, like, kind of trying to live in the shadows. Like, you have Moroto's nephew is one of the main characters, and there's, like, one of these nobles that follows Moroto around, really looks up to him, trying to live in his legend. There's this girl who's one of the daughters of the Five Villains, and she tries to, like, kind of create a new Cobalt Company, and Zosha's, like, her hero. And they have these, like, big, larger-than-life images of what these grizzled old heads were like, and, like, what it was like when they all had their devils, and they were, like, rampaging and, fighting the church, which we'll get to the church later, and taking over the whole country. Like they have these big visions of what they're like, and they're trying to figure out who they are in the light of these big legends, and then they meet these people, and they're like kind of just like these dried up old assholes, and there's a lot of difference between like what they like, the wisdom that these old people actually have for them, and it's not the wisdom they want. They want something different because they have these visions of like glory, and there's this big break there that's just a really fun look at like generational differences, especially when you have a younger generation that's like looking up to an older generation that they really appreciate. Really fun examinations there, and you get into some stuff, right? There's like themes of revenge, not just with Cold Zosha, but with other characters. Themes of friendship, and what I really like about this, for a grimdark fantasy series, these are actually anti-heroes. They're genuine anti-heroes. They're not villains, right? I jokingly call them washed up old villains, and there's a truth to that. But they're trying to do the right thing the wrong way. Or as the bluegrass band The Devil Makes Three would say, they're always trying to figure out how to do wrong right. Okay? And that's cool, because a lot of grimdark seems to be like trying to be like, oh, it's an anti-hero, but like, no, that's a fucking villain, right? That's not an anti-hero. That's just like, just a psychotic villain that you're calling an anti-hero, and we have a camera attached to them, so we're supposed to care about them, right? But these are genuine anti-heroes. They're trying to do what they think is the right thing. It may not actually be the right thing. And they're not necessarily using the most morally stand-up ways to do it, okay? So I love that in a grimdark series. Not that I haven't enjoyed myself a good grimdark series that follows a more villainous character that's being pitched as an anti-hero, but, we do see themes of altruism, mercy, and solidarity coming from these washed up old villains, right? So they're not just, they may be flawed, they may be cruel sometimes, they may often be ruthless or merciless, they may be violent, there may be sociopathic or psychopathic things that they do engage in, right? But they're like not just awful. They're redeeming, they're actually flawed and complicated characters. They're not just villains, okay? And yet, they're often, and it's grimdark, so it's going to be this way. They're often comically, and when it's comical, it's hilarious, or tragically, and when it's tragic, it's heartbreaking, short-sighted in their venal acts of self-interest, okay? So, we're reading grimdark here, so it's not, it's not all roses and flowers, right? So they do things that are short-sighted, that are self-interested. There are backstabbings and betrayals along the way, but it's not all of column A, none of column B, or vice versa, okay? And the comedy in these book series, I can't do it justice, but it's funny. It's I'm never gonna tell you some of the things that made me laugh and make you laugh. You just gotta read the book. But some of the funniest side-splitting humor I've ever read. Some great absurdism. The author is great at making the horrific absurd and hilarious, and the absurd and hilarious horrific. There's a lot of interplay between absurdity, comedy, and horror. And it's just funny, man. These characters are funny. The world is hilarious. Some really funny situations occur. And if you like Abercrombie's humor, you'll like this. It's the same type of humor. This stuff's hilarious. Now, as far as the magic system goes, man, if you liked the magic in Abercrombie, and you liked maybe the soft magic system, but you kind of wish without making it into like a hard, like Sandersonian type magic system, keeping it a soft magic system. You wish Abercrombie would have done more with the magic. There might be a little more to the magic system, quote unquote, because it's a soft magic system. You're gonna like this, okay? The magic system is based on devils, right? And the principal usage of this is there's this place, like another plane of existence, maybe, or maybe it's hell or heaven, not sure. I mean, I kind of am sure, but no spoilers. It's unclear at the beginning, so we're gonna leave you unclear. Called the First Dark, okay? And we'll get to the religion in a little bit, but a lot of the religion in the world focuses on worshiping the First Dark. And you can perform these magical rituals that reach through to the First Dark, and you sacrifice an animal, like a dog, or a wolf, or a possum, or a bat, or whatever. You sacrifice an animal to the First Dark, and a demon will come through, or a devil will come through this ritual and inhabit the body of the animal, right? And they get to have physical form and do things in our world, like the prime material world, or whatever the case may be, whatever you want to call it. And in exchange, we have like a devil that helps us out, right? And the devil doesn't want to be trapped in our world like permanently, so they kind of like try to keep you alive. Like they'll like make it so that arrows are slightly deflected and go past you, or do other things to like make it so you would survive situations you might not ever survive. And you're generally like more powerful if you have a devil familiar in this world. But at some point, if they ever want to go back and to the First Dark and be devils again without being trapped in the body of like a mouse or a dog or an owl or whatever, they have to get you to make a wish. And if you make that wish and they grant it, they're free. So you won't have the devil anymore, no familiar guarding your back, but you'll get this wish. And of course, as in any fantasy where there's wish making, there might be twists. They might, depending on how you word it, it might not be the wish you wish for, blah, blah, blah. But basically, they want to keep you alive so that when they're done playing in the real world with you, before you die, you make a wish, and if it's in their power to grant it and they're ready to go, they'll go back, leave the animal behind. You no longer have a devil, and it's set up like in like prologue chapter 1, might even be on the cover blurb, that Zosha still has her devil, and it's this dog Chop Liquor. And what a great name for a dog / devil. Okay, and the drug use in this series, man, the drug use is so much fun. So the way that the drug use works is you get insects or bugs like arachnids to bite or sting you and get high off their venom. And different bugs give different like effects based on what kind of venom they have and how potent it is and things like that. And so like it's somehow the bugs in the world are connected to the magic system. It's kind of unclear. So if you like get acclimated to being on bugs well enough that you're not just going to be sick immediately as soon as you get bit or stung, then you can go into this like adrenaline high kind of state where you're more aware and more able to function in combat and things like that. So like warriors will sometimes like bug out so that they can like get through a battle, and then they'll like get sick at the end. And sometimes they have like psychedelic effects. So like if you end up like tripping too hard, you might be tripping off your face like if you're on mushrooms or acid while you're in the middle of a freaking battle where armies are fighting each other, which is terrifying, horrifying, and it's depicted so realistically, so well. There is a scene where a character just trips off their face through an entire battle, and we see a bunch of it from their eyes, and it is wild. I've never read anything like it. Very realistic depiction of drug use and of tripping on psychedelics. You gotta check it out. There's also marijuana usage, copious marijuana usage. And part of the reason for that is that Cold Zosha, besides having been a warlord, also is like the most famous woodpipe carver in the world. Like, her pipes are sought after. People who have them, they're like collector's items. They smoke real well. So it's tied into her story. So there's a lot about pipes, smoking them, etc., etc. Characters roll up joints, they smoke. There's a lot of marijuana usage. And it's handled well, in my opinion. The church and the state, the stuff with the church and state, the religion, so wild, so cool. There's lots of cool social commentary about the religion. The religion is called the Burnished Chain, and they worship the First Dark. And they worship attributes of humanity that are like spite and jealousy and greed and selfishness, and the sins of the Burnished Chain are things like mercy and compassion and selflessness and things like that. So it's like the dominant religion openly worships the worst of humanity, and there are these humans that are called wildborn, that are born with like animal-like deformities. So like you might be born with like a beak, or like bear claws, or like lizard scales or something, whatever. And the Burnished Chain hunts down wildborn, severs the parts of them that have these like deformities, mutilate these wildborn, like scar them. They might have to have like prosthetic teeth to replace whatever animal fangs that they had, or they might have like one hand that they can't use or need a prosthetic for, or whatever. Like there are these like mutilated wards of the church basically, and they indoctrinate these people that they mutilated to be like these die-hard converts to the Burnished Chain, and they are they make them into like nuns basically. And the nuns, because this church like worships like the worst in humanity, the nuns are warriors, and warrior nuns are a really fun concept in fantasy. I love them. Mark Lawrence has a series about warrior nuns. There's warrior nuns in the War for the Rose Throne by Peter McLean. I love the concept of warrior nuns, and we even get to follow in the first book the viewpoint of a wildborn warrior nun in this trilogy. It's great. And they do some interesting stuff with the church, right? Let's see, what else? Oh, guys. The depiction of sexuality and gender in these books. Look, let me be real. I am not the biggest fan of the sort of corporate HR department vision of diversity and social justice that pervades society at the moment, and where we're supposed to like think of diversity as like this like the paragon of morality and above all other moral concerns. You know, and I'm being a little flippant and broad when I say it that way, and obviously there's more nuance to it, right? But a lot of the times when that tries to be worked into fantasy, it comes off as like really didactic and preachy, and just, you know, isn't like well integrated and all of that. But this book, the way it handles diversity, chef's kiss. All the characters are like either gay or bisexual or trans or intersex or polyamorous or whatever, okay? And it's not really talked about in the world at all, aside from depicting their relationships with each other. And like there is a little talk about like there's a tribal kid in the book, and he had two fathers, but one of them's like a trans man, and the trans guy was pregnant while the kid was alive, so the kid like saw his father give birth, which is freaking cool. And he kind of talks about it a little bit, but like for the most part, like nobody bats an eyelash. It's just like a normal thing in the world that all of these things exist. Nobody's bigoted about it. It's not a central, like there's not this huge overarching oppression. There's nobody preaching about how great this is and how this is a great example of diversity, but it is a great example of diversity. I mean, it's awesome. There's so much cool stuff in it. There's so much representation. Like, I know representation isn't the end all be all, as I just said, but when it's done well, it's really awesome. People can feel seen. People can experience, if they're, different ways of life through the lens of fiction and kind of see it depicted in a non-stigmatized way. And they just do it so well in this book, which leads me to the subversion of the love triangle trope. I won't say too much here because of spoilers, but there is a love triangle in this book series. I hate love triangles. I hate them. Sometimes they're done well and they're okay, but they're overused in fantasy. They're often done very flatly. They're often just by the numbers, and it's just like, oh, another love triangle. I read too much Brandon Sanderson before I found better fiction to read, and Brandon Sanderson has a love triangle like every single book. And Brandon Sanderson love triangles are like the bane of my existence. I do not like love triangles, okay? And this book has a love triangle, and they do it so well, and they subvert the trope. I won't say how, because I don't want to spoil anything, but the subversion works really well. It's very satisfying. It kind of folds into that diversity aspect that I was talking about, which is like a slight tease, but not a full spoiler. Yeah. I think I guess I'll end on that. If you like the first law, but you want to see it done with a system of creepy-ass devil magic, old ladies being the main hero, way more diversity. Especially way more diversity than the first Law trilogy. Okay, that was a sausage fest. There was one black lady who was the main character, and her character was just angry and paranoid. I still love Pharaoh. Okay, I love Pharaoh, but the first Law trilogy had, not necessarily the most diverse representation of people in the first Law world. Got better later. Much better. But yeah, so if these books are just great. They're funny. The magic system is great. Lots of absurdism. A little more fantastic in terms of fantasy elements, like giant possums the size of a house running through a battlefield type of stuff than First Law. But very reminiscent to First Law. You'll feel right at home if you liked First Law and the writing style and the prose and the humor and the action and the characterization of First Law. You will feel right at home with the Crimson Empire Trilogy. Dark Portents, signing out.